I left suddenly, and I was in shock and disbelief, and I don't know how, but I ended up at a women's drop-in, and I slept on the floor that night, and it was not a women's shelter for victims of violence, but it was nearby, and I got there, and from that first night, I went on to transition into a shelter after some time, spending a few nights in the drop-in and then into a women's shelter. That was traumatizing, and I was very raw. I was very vulnerable. I knew that I was angry, but I had shelter, I had food, and I left without anything. So there wasn't any money or there wasn't any belongings with me. So I really needed that. I didn't have the financial ability to do anything but that shelter. And from there, I met others. I met women who I sat around the dining room table with, and I was very inspired by their resilience. I was very inspired by their brilliance and their ideas about how we could make actually what we were going through better. And so there was peers. I went out of the shelter during the day to walk, to exercise. I found that that was really helpful for me. And I started to connect with the organization itself and the services that it offered. And that was also very helpful because I wanted to move forward and I wanted to learn. But I also really needed support for my mental health. And unfortunately, what I was feeling, the fear of really everything and everyone, that led me to, I guess, just the emotional state that I was in that continued while I was in the shelter. You know, I quickly knew that I also needed that help, that support emotionally, and there wasn't counseling available where I was. So I actually turned to my doctor and ended up with something that took quite some time, but some mental health supports. Those helped me a lot as well, meaning that I was learning new skills. I mean, I was having to learn and rebuild really fast. So from the shelter, I think that I was just starting over again. I'd left everything behind very suddenly. And although I was fighting, I wasn't, I was just trying to survive. Yes, I mean, my peers in the shelter for sure. It was a traumatizing place, meaning that there were people who, you know, had substance abuse and mental health illness, and they weren't being supported for that. So it's a very difficult place to live with, eventually in a room with 6 other women. And I stayed there for 6 months, and then I guess supports came from, you know, a flyer on a wall that I could do some skill training in the shelter. And I happened to see it accidentally. And that skill training led me into a new life. So it really opened a door for me. And I was it was the last day to apply when I saw it. So I quickly got in an application. There was some honorarium involved for doing the skill training and then some step employment. And that started a whole process of learning some skills that I really needed to move forward financially in my life and move on. Not from staff, unfortunately. I think that, you know, from my peers, from the one organization that I was working with, my shelter organization, and then others that I connected with. Definitely the skill training through Fred Victor and their employment services, as well as Elizabeth Fry. Elizabeth Fry Toronto changed everything for me. But it was the process of going through the employment services at Fred Victor that really helped. I was getting connected to a psychiatrist, and that led me to CAMH eventually. I did some great cognitive behavioral skills training and really worked on what I was diagnosed with, which was anxiety, generalized anxiety, and a major depressive disorder. And so I was fighting those emotions a lot, but just training, learning everything I could from eventually the Toronto Hostel Training Center as well, because I knew that this tough situation that I was in, I think I wanted to stay in for a career. I had been a stay-at-home mom, so I didn't have a lot of education, very little actually, and I didn't have the skills to really become employed. So through those organizations, those services, that really began something brand new for me. Financial was the biggest thing. I mean, literally, I was within moments without a home. And literally within moments, I was without any financial security to buy food, to have shelter that night. And so for me, it was leaving. I eventually lost all of my belongings. So I had to give up literally everything, including even, photographs of all my memories. I literally lost everything that I'd built up in my life for decades. And so that was a huge barrier. And it took time, it took a long time to leave that behind and start over again. Truly accidentally. I don't know how I got to the drop-in in Fred Victor in the first place. And I progressed from the shelter, which was traumatic, into a transition house, which actually had the healing supports for me to be well there for a year and really heal. So it was accidental. I didn't know about the social services. I'd never experienced them, nor had my family. And I wish that I did before. I wish I had some knowledge. I also wish I knew more about mental health, because I think that for a long time before, I had to go into an ambulance to find out that, I was actually sick, that, I really didn't know much about mental health, about what was available out there for me for supports and services and people and community eventually to connect with. The most surprising thing was an empowering new career. I ended up wanting to give back because of being traumatized in the system. I wasn't happy with what I experienced in many regards, even though I was supported by services and organizations and resources. So I learned entrepreneurship through Elizabeth Fry, and I ended up starting my own organization to help other lived experience people move forward and actually become leaders in making systems change. So I didn't think that I was capable of even learning in the beginning, learning internet skills, online skills. But in the end, I ended up starting something that manifested itself into a career and a home, because it led to financial wellness, meaning that I was getting more and more step employment. And because my resume was finally being built, I could get higher paid jobs, as well as working on my own to do volunteer work that became really something that I'm actually earning income from right now. So I've been successfully housed for 3.5 years on my own independently. And I'm really proud of the leadership that has come into my life from really that incredibly vulnerable state. that we are a community, that we really can help one another. My organization is all about peer support and peer leadership. So I think that what I'd like to let people know is that they're brilliant ideas to make change. They can come true, and that there's a system out there that actually wants to hear our voices. And when we gather together as lived experience people, we can really create change together, and we're doing so in the peer movement. Again, accidentally, I needed funds to start out with my new apartment, which I shared with a roommate, actually, who I met in the emergency shelter. We were bunk mates, and I needed funds from the YWCA, their December fund. And that wonderful organization put out an email saying that Women Act would like some people to come and volunteer with them. And that's how I got involved with Women Act. And it's been the best, by far, organization that I've come across for not only lived experience empowerment, for our voices to be heard, but also to make change as a real leader in sectors. I think the violence against women sector and Women Act have so much to teach other sectors, such as homelessness and mental health, and people, who do use substances and are struggling, working in maybe their own sectors. I think that Women Act is great as far as a research body and helping inspire policy change.